Okay, now I'm going to read chapter 10 of Trout Fishing in Chilean Rivers, Concise Survey by Alexander MacDonald. The Collanco, which is the name of a river in Chile. Some of our local fishermen are inclined to despise the small mountain streams in the central zone and argue that it is a waste of time to bother with sardines, especially after the attractions of fishing in the south. I have heard this view expressed generally by those who have taken up fishing in the south from a boat, and in my humble opinion, it is a great mistake. The best apprenticeship for the beginner to enable him to enjoy to the full extent the bigger rivers in the south is the small mountain stream, where you have to study the habits of the trout and where visibility and the art of casting count for so much. The ability to cast a fly a long way, to avoid the overhanging branches, and to place the fly over the desired spot gives one such a decided advantage. The satisfaction which comes to the angler when he picks out the spot in the stream where the feeding fish must be stationed, decides how best to approach the problem, and after several casts has his quarry firmly hooked, can best be appreciated in the small stream. And when the beginner tackles such water for the first time, he is hopelessly at sea. And it is only after he has lost a few flies in branches and discovered that he is frightening away the fish from each pool he approaches that he begins to realize that sitting in a boat in the south, waiting for a fish to grab the spoon or fly at the end of your line, is a very different story from this type of fishing, where you have to use your head and skill and really stalk your fish. And when you begin to appreciate the joys of real angling, you are on the way to greater enjoyment. Take my advice and get all the experience you can in the small mountain streams. You will enjoy the casting problems you constantly have to face. You will get full value out of your triumphs. You will learn a great deal from your failures. And when the time comes and you return to the bigger rivers in the south, the knowledge and experience you have gained will stand you in good stead and enable you to get the best out of the fishing there. Another point to bear in mind is that the matter of the size of the fish is relative to the weight of your tackle. A 3/4 pound fish on a 4 or 5 ounce rod will give you just as much fun as a 3-pounder on a much heavier rod. I must admit that there are times when the fishing in the small stream is spoiled by tiddlers, which insist on getting hooked all day long, and it is undoubtedly very irritating to spend most of your day putting back tiny fish. This generally happens towards the end of the season when the water is low and is probably responsible for the sardine reputation of the small mountain streams among certain fishermen. The best time to fish the small streams, I think, is in the early part of the season, as soon as the water clears, or better still, just as it is clearing. At this time, the rivers in the south are too full of water to provide the best of sport, but in the smaller streams, a lot of water is no serious disadvantage, and indeed rather the reverse. In order to give you an idea of trout fishing in the central zone, I have selected as a representative mountain stream the Collanco, well known to many anglers in this country. There seems to be some doubt as to the correct name of this stream, but not as far as my fishing friends are concerned. It is and will always be the Collanco. It lies in the Volcan Valley and is a tributary of the river Maipo, which it joins 5 kilometers, 3 miles up the valley beyond the village of San Jose de Maipo. From this point to the waterfall upstream, there are about 8 kilometers, 5 miles of fishing, and as far as is known, there are no trout beyond the waterfall. I was introduced to the Collanco some 20 years ago by R.M. Gilfillan, to whom I shall always be grateful. Gilly, as he is better known among his friends, is rarely seen on the water nowadays, but in his day was one of the finest fly fishermen in the country. The fishing rights on this stream are in theory rented out to a small fishing club in Santiago, but as pointed out in my earlier remarks on the legal side of fishing in Chile, fishing rights are vested in the state and cannot be leased to any private person or club except by the President of the Republic under a special clause of the law. In practice, the rights of the members of this club are limited to permission to use a certain gate of entry to the farm through which access to the stream is attained. But as there is another gate 1 kilometer, 5 furlongs lower down, through which anyone is apparently permitted to pass, the only advantage accruing to members of the club is that the upper gate means a shorter walk to the stream and a better place to park one's car. It sounds almost like high treason for me as a member of this club to make such a statement, but the facts must be faced. I have a shrewd idea also that the top gate is opened for anyone who cares to come along, and no questions are asked. My readers will be tempted to ask quite reasonably, why bother to have a club at all? The only satisfactory answer to this obvious question is that the very existence of such a club is a good thing, in that it has created an unofficial body of keen fishermen interested in the development of fishing in the country on the right lines. In effect, the practical interest of the members has been shown in their cooperation with the local authorities in the restocking of the streams and the development of fishing generally. I have seen members of this club spend a whole day on a stream catching tiddlers in the lower reaches and carrying them by mule back several miles to liberate them in a section of the stream above falls where no fish were to be found. Such efforts to improve fishing conditions are to be commended, and I trust that, despite the fact that the fishing rights enjoyed by the club members are of a rather mythical nature, they will keep the club going in the interests of the sport. The president of the club is M.S. McGoldrick, one of the best anglers in the country of wide experience, who can be relied upon to do everything in his power for the furtherance of his favorite sport. However, to return to the Collanco, I want my readers to picture a small mountain stream winding its sinuous way through the valley, tumbling down from pool to pool with an occasional run of shallow water. The stream has its source in the snow-clad Cordillera, and the water is provided by the melting snow in the spring and early summer, and by rain in the winter. As I have said before, from the waterfall to the junction with the river Maipo, there are about 8 kilometers, 5 miles of fishing. And this stream has the great advantage over other mountain streams in being relatively clear of overhanging branches. 20 yards across at its widest point, it can be forded easily, except in the early part of the season when there is abundance of water, and even then, you rarely have to go far to get across. The pictures on page blank, again, there are no pictures, unfortunately, will give you a fair idea of what the stream looks like. Perhaps the best description I can give you of the Collanco is that it is just a typical trout stream, very similar in character to those to be found in the north of Scotland and Ireland. In addition to the standing rule that trout under 12 inches cannot be taken, which incidentally is too large a minimum for the streams in the central zone, the club members have a rule of their own that not more than 30 trout can be taken in one day. This may appear to my readers an unduly liberal allowance, but in practice, members frequently have to stop fishing about tea time because they have reached the allotted number. On a favorable day, you may catch fish all the way along the stream, and 2 at a time are frequent. I have seen Henry John Brewster take 6 fish out of one pool in 15 minutes with the same fly. Suffice it to say that it is easy fishing for the average fisherman, and the expert can always amuse himself by trying to catch sophisticated fish in the pools, which come up and have a look at the ordinary fly and treat it with the utmost disdain. If I were to define the height of contempt, I should say the withering look of a good-sized trout as he turns away from a fly in a crystal clear pool with a "don't be ridiculous" expression in his eye. The non-club fishermen on this stream are mostly worm fishermen, and they catch few fish as they are generally clad in costumes which can be seen a long way off and have little chance of success except in the white water immediately below the small waterfalls in the deep pools where they do catch good-sized fish. Such fishermen do little damage to the fishing except in the closed season and are to be sympathized with in that they either do not know any better or have not the means to afford the equipment for fly fishing. There are other fishermen, however, who frequent those streams for whom I have no use whatsoever. I refer to the alleged fly fisherman who puts back nothing and whose idea is to catch the biggest possible quantity of fish, irrespective of size. Tiddlers beware when he is around. The Collanco is a favorite stream for camping out, and I have pleasant recollections of many a fine weekend spent on its banks. Fishing is much more enjoyable when there is no question of worrying over the long walk down to the car in the darkness. I remember on one occasion camping out with a friend, and after 2 days of intensive fishing, we had decided that on the following morning, we would not bother about getting up at dawn for the morning rise, but enjoy rather a lazy day. I was ready for breakfast about 9 o'clock, but my friend was still fast asleep, and there did not seem to be any likelihood of him getting up for at least an hour. The temptation was too great for me, and I had no difficulty in persuading myself that it would be rather amusing to go down to the stream and have a few casts before breakfast. A rod was all that was necessary, and there would not be any need to get wet. A spot 200 yards downstream attracted me, where there was an island with runs and deep pools on either side. There was no difficulty in getting to the island over stepping stones, and before long, I was casting from a point of vantage on the island into a deep, dark pool, running below an overhanging ledge of rock. Suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, I had the sensation of the rod being nearly jerked out of my hand, grasped it firmly, and the fun began. I realized that I was up against a major problem with my light rod and no net. And of course, it was quite hopeless to land the fish without getting into the water. I got wet, thoroughly wet, in fact, but after 20 minutes had the satisfaction of beaching a fine 2-pound rainbow, the best fish I have ever got out of the Collanco. This experience I count among the most thrilling I have ever had in fishing, and quite the most unexpected, which of course made it doubly enjoyable. On another occasion, Henry John Brewster had set out to reach the waterfall, and when he got there, he had to swim through a deep pool in a gorge, holding his rod in the air in order to reach an attractive pool immediately below the waterfall. His initiative was amply rewarded, as his first fish from the pool was a 3¼ pound rainbow, the record fish of the stream until the season when Colonel Lefebvre caught a 3½ pound brown trout in the lower reaches. I do not wish my readers to get an exaggerated idea of the size of the trout in the Collanco from the incidents quoted. Such fish are exceptional and undoubtedly difficult to catch. The average fish from the stream is probably about ½ pound in weight. Occasionally, the Collanco springs a surprise, and I have frequently seen the stream clear in the early morning, come down milky with snow water during the day, and clear once more in the evening. In February 1934, however, more than a temporary disturbance was caused by unusual weather conditions. A few of us had decided to camp out for a few days in the upper reaches, and a week previously heavy rain fell in the central zone, a very rare occurrence in the summer season. And although we were unaware of it at the time, in the region of the Collanco there was a cloudburst. We arrived rather late in the day at the gate where the mules had assembled, and by the time we reached the stream it was quite dark, which did not make the task of pitching camp any easier. Imagine our horror when next morning we found the stream a raging torrent of chocolate-colored water. One of our party tried a worm, but there was no sign of a trout anywhere, and as the conditions showed no indication of improving, we had reluctantly to break camp the next day and wend our weary way homewards after the most disappointing fishing weekend I have ever known. We learned subsequently that there had been a bad landslide higher up, which, combined with a lot of fresh snow, kept the stream dirty for about a week. The extraordinary point about this story is that when the water did finally clear, the reports of club members were that no trout were to be seen in the stream for the remainder of the season. This was a major tragedy, and we had to make plans for restocking it at the earliest possible date. This was done, and in addition, trout found their way up from the river Maipo, so that although fewer in number than in the average year, fishing was possible in the following season. Visitors from abroad who have fished this stream have been enthusiastic about it, and have found it difficult to understand how such fishing can be obtained without paying a good price for it. One has the feeling, however, that unless more control is exercised over such streams by the authorities, they will tend to deteriorate year by year. It is known, for example, that fishing goes on in the closed season, but nothing is done to stop it. In recent years, the fishing in the central zone has not been so good as usual owing to the shortage of rain in the winter and the consequent lack of snow. The small streams have had little or no water except at the beginning of the season, and the Collanco has suffered with the others. Another factor which may influence the stream in the future is the ingress of brown trout. Until the floods of the year 1934, I had never heard of or seen anything but rainbow trout in the Collanco, but imagine that in the restocking, the brown trout were introduced. Certain club members advocate not putting back brown trout, whatever the size, in order to prevent deterioration, and they are probably right. My chief hopes for this delightful little stream are centered in the enthusiasm of the members of the club, and I feel sure that if they take an active interest in it, there is little to fear. It would be a great pity to see such good fishing go steadily down until it is not worthwhile. If changes in climatic conditions and irrigation requirements are responsible, there is nothing to be said, but if the cause can be attributed to the thoughtlessness of man, I for one should raise my voice in protest. It would not be right to close my remarks on the Collanco without a reference to the late John P. Chadwick, an American who made his home in Chile for many years. A fine fisherman and a good friend, he was devoted to this little stream and fished it regularly year after year. Whenever he had the opportunity, he camped out on its banks, and he was invariably the last man to leave the water at nightfall. Many were the friendships he formed over a campfire in the still of the evening in the upper reaches of this stream. On the 4th of February 1940, he passed away peacefully in his sleep while camping out up there under the stars, and I believe that if he had the choice, this is the death he would have chosen. Intensely interested in fishing, his favorite relaxation, he was an inspiration to his fellow fishermen who mourn his passing. And here's an author's note added in 1950 or 1951. The description of the Collanco you have read was written 10 years ago, in 1940 to 41, and is a faithful picture of the stream as it used to be and ought to be. The stream itself has not changed. The climate is the same, but unfortunately, poaching of a grave nature, as reported in chapter 6, a few reflections on local problems, has taken a heavy toll, and I doubt whether the stream is worth a visit nowadays. The fishing club still exists, but only in name, as it is inactive, and its members feel that there is no justification for its continuation, as it has no legal rights whatsoever, and access to the river is given to anyone who comes along. This unfortunate state of affairs can be put right if the authorities take the problem in hand, restock the stream, and follow up with protection against such practices as I have outlined. I am well aware that this is easier said than done, but I am still hopeful that someday it will be done. It would be a great pity if this delightful stream were to remain only a memory of its better days. And that is the end of chapter 10 on the Collanco. So now I will continue with chapter 11 on the Laja. I have selected the river Laja as representative of the fishing in the intermediate zone, and I'm sure that those who know it will agree that no more fitting choice could be made. The Laja, L-A-J-A, although not well known on account of its inaccessibility, except to Concepcion and Los Angeles enthusiasts, affords grand fishing. In fact, good judges consider it to be the best fishing in the country, and from the point of view of the fly fisherman, it is certainly hard to beat. Of the local anglers, there is one who has contributed more than any other to the development of the fishing on the river, Norman Chambers, and he is to be congratulated on what he has achieved in the past 20 years. In the vicinity of the Laja, there is no hotel accommodation which would be considered worthy of even 1-star ranking in the English Automobile Association yearbook, and I'm not being unkind. Until a few years ago, there were primitive hotels at Yungay and Antuco, but I understand that they disappeared in the earthquake in January 1939. This was the Chilan earthquake, which occurred in south-central Chile on January 24th, 1939, with magnitude 8.3. The death toll, by the way, was around 28,000, making it the single deadliest earthquake in Chile. This is a footnote which I have added. So there were primitive hotels at Yungay and Antuco, which disappeared in the earthquake in January 1939, which is borne out by the fact that they are not included in the more recent railway guides. I have rather emphasized his point, as I do not wish my angling visitor to be under any misunderstanding about it. I'm sorry, that's this point. I have rather emphasized this. Some 20 years ago, Norman Chambers organized a party to spend their summer holidays camping in the Laja district. And thanks to the assistance of a gentleman farmer in Yungay, a good site was found for a camp on the banks of the Cholguan, a present trout river a few miles away from the Laja. The country folk in Chile are most ready to help fishermen, and if you should ever be stranded on a fishing expedition, there is no need to worry. You will always find a bed for the night in some farmhouse or shack, and there is no trouble they will not take to make you comfortable. The weather conditions in the Laja district were found to be excellent and reliable, and the sport was so good that the camping party became an annual feature, and there was considerable competition to fill blanks if regular attenders dropped out. The camp improved year by year, and finally its natural development ended in the formation of a club and the building of a small fishing lodge. A gentleman farmer in the Tucapel region made a present of the necessary land, and today the lodge stands proudly on a promontory known as La Peña, a monument to the initiative and determination of the founder. In the earthquake of January 1939, El Palacio, as it has been nicknamed in Tucapel, enhanced its reputation by being the only building in the district which was quite undamaged. Already in its short history, it has had the honor of housing distinguished visitors, among whom the following deserve special mention. Commander R.B. Jennings of HMS Exeter, and I've made a footnote here. Commander Richard Jennings, 1903 to 2001, directed the guns of the cruiser HMS Exeter until they were silenced by the superior firepower of the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee. So Commander R.B. Jennings of HMS Exeter, who was awarded the DSC for bravery in the River Plate action. And again, I add a footnote here. The Battle of the River Plate of 13th December 1939 was the first naval battle in the Second World War. 3 Royal Navy cruisers, HMS Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles, engaged the Admiral Graf Spee, which was scuttled by her captain off Montevideo. I remember seeing a film about this, based on this, a movie. So the River Plate action in December 1939. Lieutenant MacBurnett of the same ship, C. Armstrong, a member of the English fishing team who was very enthusiastic about the river and stated, I believe, that it was about the best fly fishing he had ever come across. And last but not least, Roderick Haig Brown, who has already been mentioned in chapter 4. 3 years ago, Sir Harold Graham Hodgson, again a footnote which I've added, Sir Harold Graham Hodgson, 1890 to 1960, was one of the foremost radiologists of his time, director of the Department of X-ray Diagnosis at the Middlesex Hospital, London, 1933 to 1956. So Sir Harold Graham Hodgson came to Chile for a radiology convention, and after it concluded, he and his wife spent a few days at El Palacio. Although the river was not at its best and the fishing somewhat disappointing from the local point of view, Sir Harold was impressed with the Laja and hopes to return one day. His first evening produced a 5-pounder, and he had good sport most of the time. Lieutenant MacBurnett will remember giving Galgo, the white pie dog, the first bath he had ever had, and how he enjoyed the experience and how the wretched Galgo loathed it. There are 2 features of this fishing lodge worthy of mention. One is the apparatus for smoking fish. In the early days of the camp, this consisted of an open fire, a length of piping, and a wine keg with the ends knocked out. Later, a beer barrel was used, and now a practical steel locker fitted up with hangers is properly installed and does the job splendidly. The other feature to which reference should be made is that the caretaker's son, who acted as gilly for many experienced fishermen at the lodge, has by example learned to use a rod, and it is a joy to see him casting a fly. A photograph of him in action is shown on page blank. Alas, no photograph. Other pioneers of this river are Agustin R. Edwards, who frequently pitched his tent on the banks of the river, Santiago Perez, and Tomas Eduardo Rodriguez. Then, of course, there are the Concepcion fishermen, who have always regarded the Laja as their own happy hunting ground. Some years ago, I spent 10 delightful days on the Laja with Charlie Gubbins. We traveled around from place to place in his Ford car, and by means of an ingenious arrangement whereby the backs of the front seats were folded back level with the back seat, we slept in the car with reasonable comfort. The car lived up to the Ford reputation by going anywhere, and when I think of some of the tracks and rocky country we went over, it is a marvel to me that we were not marooned in some remote spot away from civilization. However, we got there, and in those 10 days we saw a good deal of the Laja, as our maximum stay anywhere was 2 days. We had no set program and fished when and as long as we wished each day. Our cooking was simple, and we had all the exercise we wanted. At the end of the day, we were pleasantly tired and quite ready to turn in. And when we had enough of one spot on the river, we bundled everything into the car and moved on in search of further adventure. Quite apart from the fishing, which was splendid, I look back upon those 10 days as a most enjoyable experience, and one I can heartily recommend to my fellow fishermen. You will have gathered then that under the present circumstances, unless you are invited to the La Peña fishing lodge or one of the farms in the district, you have to make your own arrangements for camping out if you wish to fish the Laja. From the fisherman's point of view, there is a great deal to be said for camping out. The problem of the evening rise is solved, and the annoying experience of having to leave the water when it may be at its best is avoided. And now, having dealt with the question of where to live, let us go down and have a look at the river. The Laja has been described as un río noble, a noble river, and I think the description is a fitting one. It is a river which commands the utmost respect, and when you look at the waters sweeping past in a mad rush, you are filled with an awe-inspiring impression of the power they convey. The current is very strong and swift, and, except in a few stretches of stillish water, it would appear dangerous to attempt to take a boat down the river. I am informed that a Canadian canoe would be navigable on the Laja, but such is my respect for the river that, until I see it, I shall remain skeptical about it. I have never heard of a boat being seen on the Laja, other than in certain isolated parts of the river where it is possible to move around in the slack water outside the current. The riverbed is almost entirely composed of loose rocks and stones, and this is the worst feature of the Laja. When one is wading in the current, it is difficult to obtain a secure footing, and a wading staff is a virtual necessity. On one occasion, late in the season, when the water was low, I was tempted to cross the river. It looked an innocent crossing, in order to avoid a long walk to the La Peña lodge in darkness. It was a nasty experience, and I shall never forget it nor attempt such a crossing again. My advice to fishermen wading in the Laja is to go warily and watch their step, as the going is difficult. My description of the river and the heavy going might have the effect of putting the would-be visitor dead off, but the other side of the picture must be shown. The Laja is one long stretch, about 50 kilometers, 31 miles of trout fishing, run after run, with the occasional variation of stretches of still water outside the current, where the bigger fish frequently lurk. The best fishing is to be had just on the edge of the current, and that means in many parts of the river close to the bank, so that there is no need in such places to get into the water at all. Owing to the swiftness of the current, it is very difficult, generally speaking, to fish upstream, and for my own part, I always prefer to fish downstream on the Laja. The idea is to cast down and across into the current with as much line out as you can comfortably handle, and allow the current to take the fly downstream and out of the current, after which you may, if you wish, work the fly gently up towards you before the next cast. Just after it has drifted out of the current, the fly remains motionless for an instant. and that is when you are most likely to feel a tug. With the smaller trout, vigorous, and with the bigger ones quite well defined, although more in the nature of a swallow. Then everything happens very suddenly as you strike. The reel sings out and you pull yourself together in anticipation of the struggle. A 4-pounder in the Laja on a light rod will keep you busy for a quarter of an hour, and you will have to keep your wits about you all the time, as the fish will undoubtedly take full advantage of the current. When fishing in the Laja, I always have at least 40 yards of line and 60 yards of backing, and frequently I have had my line taken out well beyond the backing by a rainbow in the heavy current. One sometimes loses fish in the heavy current of the Laja through using too light a rod, and a slightly more powerful rod than the one I have suggested for ordinary purposes in the south gives a greater feeling of security. I have a wholesome respect for the Laja rainbow. I have never caught anything except a rainbow trout on this river, although I have heard that brown trout have occasionally been taken out in still parts of the river, and official statistics show that brown trout were stocked in the river in the majority. My own theory, for what it is worth, is that the river in most parts is more suited to the strong and active rainbow than the relatively sluggish brown trout. Owing to the exceptional ground feeding to be had in the river, another feature of the Laja is that it is very rarely, never in my experience, that one catches a fish out of condition. Summing up, the Laja rainbow is a strong, hardy fish, and taken in conjunction with the strength of the current, a 4-pounder on the Laja compares favorably with an 8-pounder in almost any other river I know. The best time to fish the Laja, in my opinion, is in March and April, when the water is getting low and there is apparently not so much ground feeding available. The natural surroundings of the river as a whole cannot be described as beautiful as in the case of rivers further south, such as the Tolten and the Enco. From the picturesque point of view, the prettiest part of the river is in the upper reaches above Polcura on the right bank, but it is not such easy fishing as lower down in the Tucapel and Cholguen sectors. The countryside above Antuco in the direction of the Antuco volcano and the Laja lake is well worth a visit, and I recommend the visitor to give up fishing for a day and drive up there in a car. The road is quite good and the scenery very lovely indeed. There is a story which I tell against myself in connection with the Laja, which will bear repetition. Our fishing party had camped on the farm of a local character known as Don Tito, who rarely failed to visit the camp after the sun had gone over the yardarm with his tongue hanging out, and was often there at odd times of day on similar quest or in the hope of joining a fishing expedition. On one occasion, when he had reached a singularly credulous and impressionable condition of mind at a late hour in the evening, one of our party was recounting to him how in the old days fishermen on the river Cotin used horses, and explained to him that on hooking a fish, the fisherman immediately turned his horse right about and marched proudly out of the river with his rod over his shoulder and the fish dangling behind. This appealed to Don Tito as a magnificent idea, and he forthwith proposed an expedition next day to the Laja, which was some distance from the camp, the horses to be supplied by him. Don Tito, however, remained on horseback, intent on trying out this new and comfortable, if not downright lazy, method of fishing. His tackle consisted of a thick bamboo pole, actually 2 bamboos lashed together, at least 20 feet long, which was known by us as the 3-ounce palacona. Palacona is a Hardy Brothers trademark and appears on many of their bamboo rods. A clothesline on the end of it, no gut, a large hook, heavily weighted, and a freshwater crab apancora as bait. In the choice of bait, he showed good judgment, as this crab is a great delicacy to the trout and is generally successful when everything else fails. His fishing apparel included a terrific broad-rimmed straw hat and a white coat, and the fact that he might be conspicuous to the fish did not worry him in the slightest. On such fishing parties, my tactics were to get as far away as possible from Don Tito, and on this occasion, as soon as I saw him engaged in the river, I walked in the opposite direction some 3 kilometers, 2 miles, before I started to fish. After an hour and a half of grand sport, I had 3 beautiful rainbow trout, averaging 4 pounds in my basket, and the fish was still rising. At this point, I was in the river casting at a rising fish which had missed twice, and I had just changed the fly in order to try again, when to my horror and dismay, I heard a shout and beheld Don Tito approaching on horseback over the brow of the hill. When he reached the water's edge, he asked me if there was a fish in the spot where I was casting. I, like a mug, said that there was, and without further ado, he rode into the river, got his mighty rod into action, and slung the bait with a resounding splash into the water over the correct spot. Imagine my feeling when the next thing I saw was my beautiful trout leaping around in the water, firmly hooked, while Don Tito turned right about and rode triumphantly up the bank. I could not speak with rage. I do not think I have ever before or since been so indignant or so near to committing a crime, and it was some time before I could see the funny side of the incident and join the party for lunch. When I told the story in camp that evening, there was considerable amusement. My friends get a good laugh out of it, and in my dreams, I frequently see a rider in a white coat and a big straw hat coming over the brow of the hill, carrying an enormous rod with a purposeful expression on his wicked old face. It was an education to watch Don Tito at work on the Laja. When he got into a good fish, he would lash his palacona to the nearest bush or tree, that's a bamboo rod, remember, and proceed to handline the fish. His victims were brought to the bank ruthlessly without ceremony, and he could never understand why we wasted so much time overplaying the fish and thought we were foolish to use such light tackle. One day he found one of our party using a spinning reel and thread line and decided that he was just plain crazy. He confessed to us shamelessly that he got his best fishing in the winter, that is the closed season, when there was nobody about. On one of the early camping expeditions we had with us, the late Dr. Stansby, always known as Doc, a grand fisherman and a splendid camping companion. The camp was right up among the hills with not even a village within miles, and we soon became friendly with the simple country folk up there who supplied us with eggs, chickens, etc. The camp servant informed them that one of our party was a doctor, so one day a contingent turned up uninvited for sick parade, bringing the aged and infirm as well as ailing children and a few chickens in lieu of medical fees. Doc was equal to the occasion. He knew there was nothing for it but to attend to them, and that it was no good telling them that he was a doctor of dental surgery and not of medicine. So he produced a few boxes of laxative pills and proceeded with his consultations. From all accounts, afterwards, his treatment had given highly satisfactory results. Oh, my Lord. How funny. There is another story to tell before we leave the Laja as indicative of the mentality of the country folk one comes across in those out-of-the-way districts. One of our party had caught his 4th rainbow of the day, whereupon his self-appointed secretario, who had turned up from nowhere, that's a small boy, picked up the fish and slung them over his shoulder with the remark, "Ya está hecho el día, patrón," which freely translated means, "That's all we need for today, master." His idea was that the sole object of fishing was for marketing purposes, and he was quite satisfied with the day's work. The purpose of the expedition was represented by so many fish at so much per pound and nothing else. In the old days, we used to reckon that a catch of 6 rainbows, averaging about 4 pounds, was a good day's fishing in the Laja. But as our camp was some distance away, we never had a whole day on the water. Nowadays, at the La Peña Lodge, catches are larger and the size of the fish is, on the average, less. The explanation of the larger catches is obviously the proximity of the lodge to the river in conjunction with the smaller size of the fish. But I cannot suggest an explanation for the smaller average size unless it be that there are too many fish in the river. I am not disparaging the present day fishing, which is quite good enough for anybody, and size is no criterion of quality. A year or two ago, Santiago Perez, between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. on the Laja, caught a dozen rainbows, averaging over 2 pounds, the biggest being a 7-pounder. What better fishing could one desire? Until 1940, the best fish caught in the Laja on a fly stood to the credit of Henry Munro and weighed 10 pounds, a really fine specimen of rainbow trout. I am told, however, that Senor Arturo Medina of Concepcion in the year 1941 caught a rainbow trout weighing approximately 18 pounds in the Laja, and this catch must undoubtedly be the record for the river. 2 years ago, Norman Chambers' brother Frank, on a visit from England, caught a 12-pound brown trout in the Laja near El Palacio on a spoon. He is a keen fisherman and is very enthusiastic about the fishing on the Laja. If and when you fish there, I can wish you nothing better in a day than half a dozen Laja 4-pounders on reasonably light tackle. And if such good fortune should come your way, I think you will agree that my eulogies of the fishing on the Laja are fully justified. And that is the end of chapter 11. So I will stop here for the time being. Thank you again for watching and listening, or just listening, if it was the latter. Thank you and see you soon.